Due to the length of the presentation and the depth of the material presented, I decided to split the video into two parts. Crystal Long's presentation on Access Add-Ins was previously published as part one. Geoffrey L Griffith's presentation on COM Add-Ins is published as part two. All right, so we better move on because Geoff is waiting in the wings. And we got to give him a chance to strut his stuff here too. So,
Yeah,
Geoff,
Geoff has an amazing presentation.
let's turn it over to
You're
Geoffrey
too
and
kind.
we'll go from there.
I hope it's enough. Thank you, Crystal, and thank you, George, for all that and all that information, that wonderful, all those comments you said about me. You guys are way too kind. I think you're being too nice to me. But I do have a presentation created, and there's a lot to cover. So I will just go ahead and start my slideshow up here. And I'm going to have to switch these settings really quick. Okay, hopefully everybody can see it okay.
That's looking good.
Yes, it started
Okay.
now. Thank you.
Okay, good. Get back to the beginning. There we go. Good to go. Great. So my portion of this presentation was about creating COM add-ins using VSTO, the Visual Studio Tools for Office. And I just want to say I put together all the demos and the presentation in a zip file, which you can download from here on my website. And I put that in the chat as well. So hopefully you guys can download and look at the files with me or try it out yourself while I'm going here. Either way is fine. Oh, one thing I wanted to mention is that on the download files, when George downloaded them, it gave like a security warning in Chrome, and I had to like allow it or tell it to go ahead and download, even though it had a security issue. I think there might be some binaries in there. There isn't any EXEs, but it does have DLLs and some scripts and some batch files and even some installers. So that's probably, I guess Chrome looking into the zip file and seeing those things and giving a security warning about it. And then also when it was unzipped, George was having a problem saying that some of the windows or the file lengths were too long for Windows. So if you experience that problem, I would recommend putting it on like some short path like your C drive or like C desktop or something like that. Whatever's too a little shorter than if you're downloading it to a long folder path, because some of the file names are pretty long. So just to keep that in mind when you download the file, you can just know that there's some issues with the zip file there. So anyway, going back to my presentation, somehow again, PowerPoint's giving me a hard time here. Let me go back. Okay, so by the way, I'm sorry, I'm Geoffrey Griffith. You guys know me. I've been coming to the group for a little over a year now, or maybe even longer. I started learning Access and Access 2.0. I've been professionally developing software that's built in Access or utilize Access databases since 2000. I worked on the Microsoft Access team for the Access 2007 release. I've co-authored 3 books about Microsoft Access published by Rocks Press, which is the Access 24-Hour Trainer, the Access 2010 Programmer's Reference, and the Access 2007 VBA Programmer's Reference. And, I'm still supporting Access Solutions today through my business, which is Imagine Thought, and for my customers. So, and also I have a bachelor's degree in computer science from the University of Colorado. So enough about me. My agenda today is just to kind of talk about, building COM add-ins using VSTO. And really that's the easiest and sort of the Microsoft recommended way to build COM add-ins right now for the Office apps. And that's all the Office apps except Microsoft Access, because there's no tools built into the VSTO tools for Access, actually, unfortunately, but that's how it is today. So for this meeting, I was just going to review some background information, some definitions about COM add-ins, and then I'll do this in sort of 3 demos, kind of showing you each of the steps here I took to make this COM add-in. And then we'll discuss the drawbacks of COM and the VSTO add-ins, and I'll ask questions at the end, and I'll show you some additional resources if you need more information. And so just to kind of give some background here, I don't know if you guys remember, but from the December 2023 presentation that Crystal gave a presentation on her Word document property editor. And at the time, I had thought, boy, wouldn't that be neat if it was like an add-in for Word so that, if you're if you're in a Word document or you're working on Word documents, you can just go from Word and open up Crystal's editor and then edit the document properties and close it and do that all from Word and not have to go out into Windows. I know it seems, kind of mundane. You could just go and launch it from anywhere, but it's kind of nice also to just be able to launch it from Word. So I decided, well, heck, I'll just turn it into a VSTO COM add-in because I knew how to do that and it's pretty easy. So that's what I've done here. And so that's how I've kind of come up with this add-in. And then Crystal said, oh, well, that needs to be a presentation. So here we are giving a presentation on how I made this. And when I wrote it originally, I wrote it in C# because I'm more familiar with C#, but some of the stuff here I've also made some demos in Visual Basic.net as well, because I know a lot of people are VB programmers, and so maybe they're using Visual Basic.net. I don't know, but I've also given some examples of that as well here. So I'll talk about that shortly, but that's just kind of the background for our project here and why we did this add-in. So just to jump into some definitions, what is COM? Well, COM is the acronym for Component Object Model. It is a legacy technology that was created by Microsoft in the early 90s, and it was used to create all kinds of stuff, Windows applications, parts of Windows, the Office apps. I mean, all kinds of stuff was written in COM back in the day. Basically, the original desktop applications, Access, Excel, Outlook, Word, and PowerPoint, were all COM apps back in the 90s and were written in C++. But at this point, COM is being phased out, and it's still included in Windows. Most of it still runs. There's some stuff that's been removed from it and changed around a bit over the years, but for the most part, it is in all recent versions of Windows, including Windows 11. And you can run and build COM apps still today. So, it's still there, but it's being phased out. So what is a COM add-in? Well, a COM add-in is really basically just a collection of code that implements the COM add-in event methods to provide some functionality for another COM-based application. And obviously, Crystal just showed us a whole bunch of add-ins that she made, and those are really cool. And so I think everybody understands why you would have add-ins. But one of the things that's neat about COM add-ins is they can be application independent, and theoretically, a COM add-in can work with many different, COM applications. It doesn't necessarily have to be just one, like just Word or just Access or just Excel. If you do all the things to implement everything, it could be application independent as well. In the olden days, COM add-ins were typically built in Visual C++ or old Visual Basic prior to .NET. And currently, if you want to build a COM add-in, there's really kind of two ways to do it in Microsoft world right now. It's using C++, using the ATL to build a pure COM add-in, which is a COM add-in that's compiled to COM code, which is a little bit different than the other method, which is using .NET to implement the COM methods. And you can do that using C++, C#, or VB.NET, or any other .NET language that would support compiling to COM. But actually, in that case, it's compiling to the .NET bytecode. So it's a little bit different than just pure C++ in ATL. And like I said, there are probably other languages that do support COM, but generally, these are how people are, creating COM add-ins, for the past couple decades. Was there a question?
Yeah, when you say .NET, do you mean .NET Framework or .NET 5.0 and later?
I would say .NET Framework, because actually in this case, my add-in is using 4.8 Framework. And so you're right, there's this new stuff in .NET and the .NET Core and also Visual Studio Code and all this stuff that's it's separate. So the VSTO tools work with the, traditional classic .NET stuff, the .NET Framework. And it's not designed for Visual Studio Code or using .NET Core. But I will say that the new model of add-ins, which is not COM, it's just it's their new model of Office add-ins, and I'll talk about that a little bit. It does have plugins for Visual Studio Code to use the core, .NET Core, and all that stuff. So that's available, but that's not for COM Add-Ins. Does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. So what is VSTO? Well, VSTO is the Visual Studio Tools for Office. It's basically just a collection of like libraries, templates, Visual Studio projects for working with the various Office applications. In this case, and why it's useful for us in this situation is that VSTO provides templates to make COM Add-ins for basically Excel, InfoPath, Outlook, PowerPoint, Project, and Word. Notably, Access is not there. And we could talk about that and speculate on that all day, but I'll just kind of leave it at that. There is no support for Access in VSTO, unfortunately. But the ability to develop, it provides the ability to develop add-ins using the Visual Studio code tools, the ability to debug the add-ins, even while they're running in Word or Excel through the Visual Studio debugger. It also provides an add-in installer for your project, which is awesome because it saves you all the work of having to do the registration and all these things that are kind of tricky to do in COM. And so it's basically taking a lot of the hard work, and lifting it up for you. And you just have to basically write a little code to do the add-in, which is really nice. So, and then it also has other tools like some document tools, some document and code tools for other things in the applications. It's not just for making add-ins. They have a whole bunch of stuff in the VSTO tools. But today we're talking about the add-ins. Using VSTO, it's really the only way they're recommending to use COM Add-ins. But again, even these VSTO tools are maybe going away soon. I just kind of want to bring that up. This COM stuff is slowly being phased out. So who knows how long this stuff will continue to be supported at this point. But that basically brings me, I didn't know, actually I should ask if anybody had any questions, because that brings me to our first demo here. I see there's 2 things in the chat. I don't know if that's questions or not. So I think everybody's clear on what add-ins are and what VSTO is. It's just a set of tools on top of Visual Studio that allow you to make COM Add-ins real easily. So my first demo is Crystal's add-in. Whoops, shoot. Crystal's the add-in I made for Crystal is what it is. And let me just kind of switch over here to the download file. So, I downloaded the POG files here, the ones I had downloaded or I had put up on my website, so you guys can download and see all the demo files and the presentation. And if you go on here, when I downloaded it again, I had that security warning. Also, I noticed that when I checked the properties on this, I had a security warning here too. So I had to check the unblock and apply that so that I could unzip this and use those files. I just wanted to mention that as well. So I do have this unzipped, and I kind of just want to go through these presentation files real quick just to kind of show you the files that I have. If you go in here, there's basically 3 folders. This is the first folder for the first demo. This is the second demo, and this is the third demo. And then I have a sample resume doc file that you can use in Word to sort of demo this add-in. And so really quickly, just showing the files here. This is what's included. This is a complete installer package for a COM Add-In. I kind of cut corners and cheated a little bit here. I'm using a batch file to do some of the installation steps, actually myself, because the VSTO installer does not do everything for you. And I didn't want to build a full-blown MSI installer just to keep things nice and simple here. But just keep that in mind. You can use this to basically install these files, and you could try it yourself. I'll just install it now myself. And it sort of runs this little batch script and pops up this thing. It says unknown publisher. That's because I have not signed the files, which I will talk about later. But you can just hit install here basically. And that basically installs the add-in on your computer. So now it should theoretically be installed for Word for you once you do that. So those are the files we just talked about. And actually, I just wanted to say, I said what the install was, and I kind of showed you the install process there. But I also will talk about what all these files are really quick. Basically, these are the install and uninstall batch files that I created. This is an output file that the application uses. This is built by Visual Studio, and a bunch of these things are too. So this DLL, basically everything here down is all stuff that's built by Visual Studio. the VSTO add-in, this being the actual add-in installer file here. This is the debug file, this is the manifest, and this is the main DLL for your functionality that you'll build in Visual Studio. Everything else here was stuff I put in here. This is obviously the access files, they're ACTE files, are the both. So anyway, you can see that I have two access files, of the ACTE files, I should say. One is for x86 and one is for x64. And so one of the really nice things about these VSTO tools is that because they're .NET code, they compile to bytecode, which is platform independent, believe it or not. So this whole package works for both x86 and x64. And the only thing I had to do was make, separate databases because of the limitation and access that if you have an ACTE file, it has to be compiled for that specific architecture. So aside from that, I basically can make these VSTO add-ins and not have to worry about the architecture of whatever system this is being installed to, which is one of the beauties in my mind. The other thing is I have a quick registration key here that I use to set a reg key to trust the install location so that when they run these ACTE files from the add-in, we don't get the security warning, right? That basically the folder it gets put in will be trusted once my setup script runs this reg key. And then just some, I have the icon for the Access app, and then this PNG, which is the same as this icon, is actually the one that's used within the add-in on the ribbon itself. That's basically all the files here. Sorry to kind of drag on about this, but I kind of want to talk about this. And the thing I really loved about, these VSTO add-ins is that, it's platform independent. And, you can basically make this whole thing and a public distribution package with this stuff as a minimum. And ideally, you would also have, instead of these batch files, you would have an installer made. And all of these files would be signed as well as the installer. So you don't get that warning here that says unknown publisher. But since we didn't sign them, we saw that warning when we installed. So anyway, continuing forward, now that I've installed this thing, once you basically run this in Word, so I'll go back to our files here, and I've installed this add-in. So if I open up a Word document now, I'll pull it over here, we can see that basically there's the add-ins tab, and then we have this property editor. This is my add-in here, and if I push this button, it did work. I didn't know if I had to trust the document. I guess I don't have to. It was working. So basically, I clicked it, and it opened up, Crystal's Word document editor as an add-in, which is pretty cool, I think. And it's right here in Word. So how do we make this stuff? How do we do all this? It's actually pretty simple to do. Let's see here. Go back to my presentation again. And then there's one more thing. Actually, I forgot to mention. So, we ran the add-in, but then there's also removing COM add-ins, and it's a little bit different in the apps than the normal add-ins, especially with what Crystal just showed us, how the add-ins on the normal ribbon is where you would remove and add add-ins like in Access. And that's true for Word too. So if we go back to the Word document, wherever I had that. So here, if we're on the home ribbon, we go to the add-ins tab, notice our add-in doesn't show up here. That's weird. That's because COM add-ins are deprecated and they're not shown on this stuff. This is the new add-ins, actually, the new add-in model, which is not that new anymore, apparently. But if we go to the backstage, the file menu, and we go to the account, and we go to add-ins here on the Word options, way down at the bottom, there's this Manage COM Add-ins, and you click the Go button, and you get this dialog. And this is where you actually uninstall and install, or can install your COM Add-ins for Word. And actually, this is the same for Excel, PowerPoint. They're all like this. So you can see here our Word property editor add-in. If you just want to disable it and not show it, you can just choose that. Or uncheck that, and it won't show up, and it won't even load when Word loads. But if you want to remove it completely, just select it, click remove, and it'll be gone from your system. At least it'll be gone from Word, which basically removes some reg keys. But the installation that we had is actually still there. So I made an uninstaller too. If you just want to remove it, you can just double click that, run it. It'll actually do a silent uninstall of the add-in through the the Microsoft Office Trust stuff. Remove the trusted location as well, and that's it. And that basically uninstalls everything for you. So that's how I cheated a little bit by making this bat files to uninstall and install this thing. Basically, removing COM Add-Ins is a little different than if you're just using regular add-ins or the new add-in model. I kind of talked about the benefits of COM Add-Ins already. The thing that's most useful about them is they can be installed and distributed to a lot of people, and it's like a little application that can be used with other applications, and they're really easy to create using the VSTO tools, and they can be created in a bunch of different programming languages, C#, VB.NET, and they are also application and architecture independent. So as long as they're pure .NET, obviously in my case, I had to compile my Access database to the right version, but at least I can make one distribution package that works for all platforms. So there's a lot of nice little things. And also the libraries, the VSTO add-ins have all those libraries, all the .NET libraries available to them, as well as anything else that Visual Studio or .NET can consume. So it is really powerful. The requirements for creating VSTO add-ins is basically, at least with these templates, is Microsoft Office 2013 or higher is what it said. I'm currently using 2021. I know it'll definitely work with 2019. I haven't tried anything older than that lately, so I don't know, because this is Visual Studio 2022. So I don't know how far back it will actually work, but the templates said they work with Office 2013 or higher. And it will also work with Office 365. You also have to have Visual Studio 2022 or a recent edition, but I recommend 2022. It's free. You want the full edition, not Visual Studio Code edition. That has the new stuff in it, but you can't run the VSTO stuff in Visual Studio Code. So you want Visual Studio 2022, and I provided a link here. It takes about 30 gigabytes of hard drive space and about 2 or 3 hours to install at a minimum. So, plan on taking some time out of your day if you're going to install Visual Studio 2022. And then once you do the installation, you can choose the component that includes the VSTO stuff. It's like SharePoint and VSTO it's a component during the installation. You just check it and it will be a free download. And even if you don't choose it during installation, you can actually go into Visual Studio 2022 and go to the Tools menu and get Tools and Features option, and you can choose under the other tool sets, use the Office SharePoint development and just check that, and then it will, you can install it and you'll get all the VSTO tools basically. So that's really easy and handy and cheap because it's free. So that's the greatest part right there. So does that all make sense? I know I ran through all that stuff really quick. Do we have any questions at this point? There's so much to cover here, and there's a lot I'm barely scratching the surface of this stuff, and I'm running through it really fast. If you have questions even afterwards and you're looking at this, feel free to email me or, whatever you need to do to get a hold of me, call me, throw rocks at me. I'll try to answer questions, but I know I'm covering a lot of stuff and it's at a high level, but there's a lot of in-depth stuff here. So hopefully it kind of makes sense, at least a little bit.
Jeff,
The next
quick
part, let me
question.
go. Yep, go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, is it fair to say that in creating a COM add-in, you have access to essentially all the .NET libraries?
Well, if it's pure COM, here's the thing. So if you're going in purely in COM, that's like a C++ compilation. So you don't necessarily even have access to .NET at all unless you import those libraries into C++. But again, that's sort of a level above. But if you're using VSTO or you're making if you're using the .NET tools, not just the pure C++ and the ATL, but if you're using the .NET tools, Visual C++ or C# or Visual Basic .NET, those actually are, because it's .NET, are the .NET binaries. So you would have all the access to all the .NET tools in those particular situations. Does that make sense? I know it's a little confusing. The key to understanding is COM was written in C++, and Visual C++ is actually a different programming language. The language is the same, but the how it's built and what the tools are built in are different than C++.NET. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
I know it's a little confusing.
it does. I'm fiddling around right now with COM callable wrappers for .NET classes.
Okay, good.
Just trying to figure out how it sounds like what you're discussing here encompasses that.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. So so if you're using like C++.NET, you can compile that code to COM binaries, actually, believe it or not. Same with C# and same with VB.NET. And the really great thing is not even just compiling to it, you can call like DLLs or Windows components or all that stuff. Anything that was written in COM, you can call those things from .NET as you're finding out. So what people tend to do is they make these wrappers around these older COM things that are for .NET, so you can use those older COM tools in .NET programs these days. And actually, that is exactly what these VSTO templates are. They are wrappers, basically, or they're more like sort of project wrappers that basically implement the 5 COM methods necessary for using an add-in in .NET code, and that's like the template part of this COM add-ins. And then they expose 2 methods to you, which is one is called startup and one is called shutdown. And then anything else that needs to be done, you can just write code in these .NET classes that wrap these COM calls to the application itself.
Well,
does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It actually goes 2 ways. You can write wrappers for COM objects to be used in .NET, and you can write wrappers.
That's right.
.NET objects to be used in COM.
Exactly. In fact, with .NET, you can write a wrapper or write some functions and libraries, and then you end up compiling those as with the COM, or I should say with the COM metadata and that kind of stuff. So it's like a COM DLL, so the COM can see that and call into that .NET DLL, basically.
Yeah.
It looks like Brian has his hand raised too, by the way.
Yeah. Geoff, thank you for that. You demonstrated a Word application add-in. You said there was no template for Access. Does that mean you can't build a COM add-in with Access, or it's just a bit harder?
No, you can. You absolutely can. The fact that there's no VSTO template project for COM add-ins for Access, that's just unfortunate. But you certainly can. And actually, I believe Philip Stifel's presentation next month to the European Users Access Users Group will be about building a COM-specific application for Access apps. Unfortunately, in the VSTO tools, there just isn't one, but you could do that. And actually, I'll kind of show you once we get into these next demos here, what methods it'll be and what you would need to do to basically make this for Access as well.
Right.
But I didn't make an example of making one for Access or turning this into an Access one, but I can just kind of briefly show you. I was going to briefly, touch on what that is here in a little bit.
Okay, that'd be great. Thanks. One other question is, if I may, you also showed the modern add-ins button and said before you move to the COM add-ins in Word.
Yep.
Are they all the new script language? Are they scripting language?
Yeah, that's like the HTML. It's the new, what they call the new model of add-ins, and I think you make them in JavaScript or HTML, CSS. I think there's a bunch of different ways you can make those, but those are not COM add-ins.
Right. Okay, but they are still viable the same way with Access as well, are they?
I think so, but I actually don't know that much about the new add-ins. I don't know how they work with Access. I assume they do, but I don't know that for 100%. I haven't tested it.
I have a feeling it's TypeScript is their one of their languages, and I don't think it's
possible.
I don't think it's supported in Access. It's only in the web-enabled 365 applications.
Well, that may be the case. Honestly, unfortunately, I just don't know the answer. We could look into that though, for sure. Maybe I will take a look at that more closely and get back to you.
Thank you.
We should do that in a follow-up sometime.
Okay, so now I just want to do a quick demo. I showed you, how that add-in worked and how to install and uninstall it and all that stuff. Now I just kind of want to show you how to create these COM add-ins using VSTO. It's actually super simple. I'm not even going to load up the demo files just yet. I made a walkthrough in the presentation on how to do this because it's just that simple. But then after I do this walkthrough, I'll show you the demo files here. But just know that there's actually two sets of files in the second folder, which are the demo files. One folder is a project that's created in C# it says CS on the end of the folder name. And then there's a second folder in there that has a VB on the end of the folder name, which is the exact same project, the exact same code and everything, just made in VisualBasic.net. So you can see and contrast both of them, because obviously I know some people prefer Visual Basic over C#, and I'm a C# guy mostly, so I just made both. Anyway, so I'll continue here. So to create this add-in and make this functionality work is actually pretty easy. All you have to do is start Visual Studio. And then when you start Visual Studio, this is like the start screen. You just basically choose create a new project. And then if you like, you can just search on VSTO. And you can actually choose the language you want. So if you just want a VB.net, there's a little pull down there, and you could choose VB or you could choose C#. In this case, I just chose the C# Word add-in is what I did. Word VSTO add-in, and that's in C#. So then you just choose that, click next, and then you basically have to just set the folder paths for your property for your add-in, and also the name of your project. And this is I just said Word add-in test and put it on my desktop. And I did this in .NET Framework 4.8. It probably is supported in tons of different versions, but that's probably one of the most recent versions maybe I have on my machine or something. I don't know. It just defaulted to that, so that's what I used. And so once you do that, it just basically opens up Visual Studio. This is what it looks like. In the left side of the screen, you have the code pane. Basically, that's where you write the code and stuff. And on the right side of the screen, you have these sort of other properties panes and the Solution Explorer and the toolbox and stuff, kind of like Access if you're looking at the VBA editor, kind of like that. Basically, it's when you've created this project, there's not much here, but there is one main file, which is this add-in.cs. And if it's in Visual Basic, it'll be .vb. And then it basically has some VSTO generated code, which we'll talk about a little bit later here. But it gives you two basic methods, which is this add-in startup and this add-in shutdown. And those are the basic methods. So when Word starts, it calls this startup method. And then when Word shuts down, it calls the shutdown method. And so then basically you can start adding code into here and building your whole, classes or project or forms or whatever you like. And then you just call it in either the startup or the shutdown. Or what you can do is add a ribbon here. So that's our next step. And what I did is just go to the project menu and do add new item. And when you add new item, it'll pull up the dialog and it'll say, a bunch of stuff, all the different templates of things you can add. Just choose ribbon XML. I will say one thing here. I noticed this ribbon visual designer. I haven't tried this before. I'm sure it's probably the same thing, and maybe it's got some visual tools there for making ribbons. It looked interesting. I didn't try it, but it might be worth trying out. But in this case, I just did the ribbon XML. You create a name for the class. I called it custom ribbon.cs. You could call it custom ribbon.cs or .vb. Click the add button, and then it basically adds two new files to your Visual Studio project. And you'll notice on the right side of the screen in the Solution Explorer, you have a file called customribbon.cs and customribbon.xml. So the CS, and sometimes if it's in a VB project, it'll be called VB. That's the class file itself with the code in it. And then the custom ribbon XML is obviously the ribbon XML we're going to use for the Word add-in ribbon. And so the nice thing about this, again, the VSTO tools, is once you add this template in here, it actually even tells you right here in comments exactly what you need to do to make this work in your add-in application. So you can really just if you notice under number 1 here in the code editor, it says, copy the following code block into this add-in, this workbook, or this document class. So for us, in this case, it'll be this add-in.cs. We just need to copy this protected override function here to the create ribbon extensibility object. And what it does is it just returns our custom ribbon class to that override call, which means when Word starts up, it's going to call this ribbon extensibility object. And instead of the base class being called, because we overrode that class, it's going to get a reference to the new ribbon that we're going to make here and give it. To do that, we just basically copy that little bit of code into our this add-in class, and we'll return the new ribbon. And then the next thing to do is basically edit the ribbon XML to make the ribbon what we want it to look like. And I don't want to get into this too much. Obviously, there's a ton of stuff you can do with the ribbon. In this case, I kind of just kept it simple. All I did was added this block for the tab tag. I replaced the default, which is like a line or two of XML, and I replaced it with all this code you see here under tab. And just to talk about what these things are really fast, basically the required settings for the tab tag, which is the highest level tag here, basically with data in it, with attributes in it. That basically must specify the tab add-ins value. So you notice here we have the ID MSO equals tab add-ins. That's to specify that our group and button are going to be on the add-ins tab. Then under that tag, we have the group tag. And that just basically is the group and the ribbon. And there's really only two important properties there. There is ID, which is the variable name of the group that you would call from like code. You don't see that. But then there's the label, and that's the text name displayed for that group on the ribbon. So you can just make that whatever you want it to be, basically, which is nice. And that's a level up above just using the command bars for the add-in, which is nice. And so then the tag under the groups tag here is the button tag itself. That's the actual button on the ribbon. And the ID is the variable name of that button control that you would call in code, but you don't see that on the ribbon. The label is the actual text name that's displayed on the ribbon for the button. So you just put whatever value you want. In this case, we used property editor is what we put there, and that's what will show up on the ribbon. Then there's the size option. One of the nice things about doing our own custom ribbon here is we can have the large icons. So the normal size is the small ones. They call it normal. And that's the default value in the size tag. And if you don't specify the size tag, it'll be a small one. But in this case, we want a nice large icon. So you can see that our size attribute equals large here in the button XML. And then the last two things that are the most important, aside from the tooltips, are the onAction and getImage. And what these are callback functions that the ribbon is going to call when somebody clicks on the button. That's the onAction. And then the getImage is when the ribbon is loaded, it calls into this function to get the image back to show on the ribbon. So those are kind of the two last things that we have to do to our project, basically, to make this whole thing work out just right. And then specifically the ribbon XML I added is just this chunk. I put it in here in case somebody wanted to copy and paste it just to get it right and everything. But let's continue on here. So as I said before, the onAction, and let me just look back here again. You notice that for the onAction, we have the onProp edit click, and that's the name of the method we're going to write in our ribbon class to basically implement the ribbon click. And then there's the getImage, and that's get property image edit, get prop edit icon. That's the name of the function we're going to write in the CS class to basically return a bitmap image so that Word can display it. And so here I've kind of just added these two. You notice we got get prop edit icon, and the function itself just takes the iRibbon control parameter here. That's just the control itself. So if you wanted to modify the control in code, you could just do it here in the function if you needed to. In this case, we don't need to do that. So basically, all I do is just return a bitmap, And I show just a fake path here, but I'll show you what I use for the regular path once we're done here. And then the other thing was the on action callback method we had to implement. So that's the on property edit click. That's the lower function here. And I just put a comment in there. This is where you actually run the code from whatever your button click does, that's where you write your code to run here. So the last thing we'll do, because we wanted to get an image for the project, is we're going to add an image to our project so that it'll show the image on the ribbon. So just go to project, add existing item. And I apologize, I actually forgot a screen here in between these things. Normally there would be a file selector and you would select the image file you want, and then it would add it to the project. And you can see in the right side of this page in the Solution Explorer, there's the icon.png file there now. And so just to make that build with our project, we'll want to right click on that and choose properties. And when we choose properties, it'll take us to the properties pane, and we'll want to, for the property that's called copy to output directory, we'll need to select copy if newer. And so that'll copy it over to the file, to the build directory when we build the project, basically. And so then you'll notice I went back to my code here, and I've now just chosen icon.png because that's in the same folder with our binaries for the output. So we can just give it the relative path. We don't have to specify the hard full coded path because we don't necessarily know what that is on anybody's machine. So we can just use the relative path for now, which is great. That'll work out. And so that's for the get prop edit icon method. And then lastly, for the on prop edit click button, what I did here in our sample files is I just made it show a message box just to be simple, just to make it as simple as possible. So in this case, I just put in the message box to show the ribbon button works. And so now the next thing you do, once you've done that, you can test this whole thing. And that's everything you need really to get the basic wrapper for a add-in set up. And it'll put a button on your ribbon so you can launch things from Word, basically. And to test all this, you can just hit the F5 key or go to debug, start debugging, and it will run Word. And when you go into Word, it'll actually open Word. It does all the debugging. It does all this stuff automatically. And then you can load a document, and you'll see your add-ins tab is there, and that the property editor button is now available. And when you click it, you'll see this thing that says it worked, basically. And that's basically the demo of testing your add-ins. So I know that was all in C#. Let me just quickly switch over and just kind of show you this real fast in Visual Basic as well. So I have this here. I didn't put this in the thing, but I didn't put images of this in the presentation, but this is in the demo files. And you can see in this case, in Visual Studio, it's all in VB, but it's basically the same thing. We have this add-in.vb, we have our custom ribbon files, we have our icon PNG, and then we have a certificate. That's a temporary certificate that that Word makes. Somehow I can't lower that. There we go. Sorry. That's a temporary certificate that Word makes when you compile this project. So that's just nothing really. If you look here in our custom ribbon, again, I've added some stuff here. Our get property edit icon, and I just basically return a new bitmap image, icon PNG, our on property edit click, and I just messagebox.show. There we go. That's it. This is everything. Oh, and then we had our override function in this add-in class that we used to basically return our custom ribbon. And then we had our custom ribbon code, which is just this. It's the exact same as in C#. So basically that's the demo. That's the basic add-in. Whoops. Are there any other questions at this point?
Adrian, you specify?
Yes, certainly. I wasn't sure if Geoff was going to say something more.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Stopped.
Go ahead.
When you had the on action property set, and you as a function, but it looked to me as if it was a subroutine method rather than a function method. And I
Yes,
wonder
it is.
if the format of the on-action property is different when you're using one versus the other.
Let's see. So you're saying right here.
Get property editor. No, not that one. That's not the on-action. That's the get the image one.
Are you
But
talking in here?
Yeah, except not the get image, the on action.
Oh, this one.
Edit click. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, so you're saying this guy. Oh, sorry. This guy. You're right. It is a sub. It is a sub in this case. You know what? That's a good question. Maybe this code isn't right. Let's try this right now. Actually, I wonder, did I even run this code? I thought it had to be a function.
A sub.
Jeff,
And,
the reason I asked, if I may, Ken, the reason I asked is because you have two different ways of doing it with the command bar buttons and controls. I wondered if it might be the same here, in which case you'd need to know about that if ever setting the on action.
Yeah, it looks like it still works. It looks like it can be a sub or a function. The on action doesn't return any value, so I assume it's okay, because really the difference between a sub and a function is that the sub doesn't return any values.
That's not true.
Okay.
Okay, well, maybe that's not true.
For example, if you use get label and you specify a function, the function is a sub, and
a function is not a sub.
You're passing it the control of that you're calling it from, and it actually returns a text label. So in some cases, yeah. So if you're using get label, you specify the name of the sub, and that passes the control name, or actually the control as an iRibbon control, and returns the text that you feed it back.
You keep talking about returning values from a subroutine, and as just explained, you can't return values from subroutines.
Well, in this case, you do.
No, that's a function.
So I'm not super familiar with VB.NET. In VB.NET, can you return values with a sub?
No, because a subroutine.
So. I'm not here. I'm not here.
You can if you pass the data structure.
With any sub, if you pass it by
a value returned is not the same as a value updated, Eric. The definition of a subroutine is a procedure that doesn't return any value. The definition.
That's what I thought too. That's what I thought.
But you're passing the label. You're passing the label by ref, so it's returning.
Oh, that's different. If you pass it by reference, though, that's different.
That's not returning a value, though.
That's not returning a value. That's a side effect of the subroutine or the function.
And it's perfectly valid. It's just not. It's not returning.
It's not a return value. It's not a return value. Yeah, in this case, I said function. In this case, I used a sub. I don't know if a function works. The sub definitely works. I just tried it. Let's try function here really quick and see if that, whoops. Yeah, let's see if this works as well.
On property edit click, yeah.
So let me open, whoops.
If it doesn't, Jeff, the thing I was considering is it may be, because the format.
It actually worked, though. It did work.
It does work. It does work.
It does work. Yeah.
In which case you don't need to worry about what might have to do instead.
Might or might not. I don't know. I guess that's just what I had, and you know what? It looks like both work in this case. I don't know. I'm certainly not an expert on ribbon designing, and so a lot of this stuff is really based around the ribbon stuff, and I unfortunately don't know all that much about the ribbon. I am not an expert in that area. You know who it is? Kevin Bell knows a lot about those things. So
can I kind of step in and say we are at a point where it might be a good place to turn off the recording.
Oh, okay. Well, do we want to do
what I would like to do is ask Geoff to kind of wrap up, do a summary or something. And also, would you consider coming back later to sort of do part 2 of this? Because frankly,
there's still quite a bit to talk about.
Yeah, there's a lot more to talk about that I think can benefit from a little bit of time to marinate and then come back and have a part two and talk about it if you don't mind. Would anybody object to having a follow-up?
I would love a follow-up.
Well, do we, I mean, would you object to me just finishing what I've said so far here really quick and just kind of highlight a few other things, or do we want to stop right now?
Well, we're already at an hour and a half.
Oh, okay.
So
Sorry.
that kind of puts us in
I see.
a spot.
Especially for the recording, Geoff. Sorry.
Yep.
Sorry,
Yeah,
George.
for the
Makes it very
purposes of
difficult
the
for that.
recording, it makes it a little bit awkward.
But he made so many slides, George.
I know.
We're almost done. We're almost done, but
Yeah, if
still,
you can get to a good stopping place, that'd be good.
yeah. I mean, we got to the end of this, basically I showed you how to make the thing. The other thing I was really going to talk about really quickly is the output of these files. And it's a lot like the files that I showed you already that were my distribution package. And basically that's these debug files. There's really not much here. You got the VSTO installer, you got the debug file, you have the DLL manifest, which describes the DLL, and you have the DLL itself, and then you have the core tools DLL, and then the icon. And that's the whole package of just, what is built from this Visual Studio project. And the really nice thing here, in my opinion, is the VSTO installer, because it does the registration for you with Windows and with the application that it's made for, in this case, Word. So,
sorry, Geoff, where you were there with the list of files, because this was something that someone asked earlier, I think Ron asked, I may have remembered the wrong person, but they asked, was everything there? And I thought it couldn't be because there was no C# or VB file in there.
Nope, you don't have any of those because those are compiled. The C# and VB files are the code files, and those get compiled to DLLs basically. So
you've already done the compilation of those into DLLs.
Right. So our Word add-in test. So our you notice we have two main files here. We have this add-in.cs, which is the code file for the add-in, and then we have the custom ribbon.ch, which is the class for the ribbon stuff. And all that stuff, when you compile this, all that stuff actually gets just dumped into our Word add-in test.dll. And because it's registered with Word, when you click that button, I should say when Word starts up, I should say, it basically has this override. Let me go back to it. Has an override method here. It has this add-in startup, so that's the code that you could run in here if you want to do it right when Word starts. But this is basically Word knows that it's been installed there, basically. So when it loads up, it basically runs this add-in startup, and in this case, it just loads our ribbon actually because we overrode the ribbon method. But if there was code here, it would run there basically.
But you've got a version with code in. Are you saying that we don't have access to that code? Because we can't obviously do this from scratch if we don't have that code. If we don't have the files we would need to build from scratch, we can't follow in your footsteps, is what I'm thinking.
Well, what I've shown you was just a template, right? So when I created this was just the VSTO, the Word add-in VSTO, or the Word VSTO add-in template. And all this stuff was created, except for the little bits of code I wrote there. This was all just created by the Visual Studio project. And actually, that was one quick thing I wanted to say here about the other thing. So how does all this stuff work with COM? Like, how did this all work with the COM Add-ins? Because I didn't see anything that was part of COM. Well, actually, what happens here is if you look under this VB, there's actually this designer file. Whoops. Let's see. Oh, maybe you can't see it in the VB. That's interesting. Well, that's really interesting. Okay. Here it is. Sorry. Yes, here it is. So this add-in.designer.vb. So this is actually where the real work is done to implement the COM add-ins. And this is just a code file that was created by the VSTO guys, and it's included with all the projects. So if you look in here, the methods that you have to override in COM are initialize, on shutdown. I thought there was an on startup too, but maybe it's begin initialization, end initialization. Anyway, 5 of these are basically what's been overridden, and we can look through this file. Yeah, and I'll let you guys look through this file more too, because this is what you need to do if you want to wrap the COM code or wrap your COM code with .NET calls, basically. So that's how the VSTO stuff works. There's actually quite a bit of code here too, by the way, that basically implements the COM add-in for VSTO.
But you're saying that you don't, although the code that you added was minimal, you're not including the code, you're including just the DLL.
No, the code, well, I mean, yeah, the actual code lives in the code project, if that's what you're asking. The code lives in this file, but when you compile your code in .NET, it's not the code. Actually, the code itself is removed, and it's actually compiled to a bytecode for .NET, right? So it's like a compiled code, but it's not actually it's not actual machine code. It actually is interpreted by the .NET runtime, is what happens. So it's kind of like more like Java in that sense, because when you compile Java code, it's not compiled to machine code. It's compiled to a bytecode that the Java runtime executes. That's the same thing with .NET. When you compile .NET code, it can actually be compiled to machine code, but normally it compiles to a bytecode, which then gets executed by the .NET runtime, if that makes sense.
Well, that sort of does make sense, but what I'm still struggling with the idea that you don't include. I mean, I assume you understand that if anyone wants to follow in your footsteps, just following your instructions would leave them a little bit in the dark. Not the instructions aren't good, but they haven't got an example to work with if they haven't got your code. I mean, they could repeat it from the video, but that's a lot of effort to go to just to because they might want to do other things with the code. But having a basis to start from is a lot easier. It's like the old Hello World thing. It's a lot easier to have a basis there, something works from scratch, than trying to do it yourself. And if you make a mistake, you don't know whether it's your mistake or whether
But isn't that the demo files?
Well, I don't know. I don't think in the demo file you had the code, did you?
Yeah, absolutely. So what I just showed you, and what I was saying at the beginning of this little demonstration here, was basically. Let me just show you one more time. Make sure everybody caught that part. Maybe I wasn't clear on that. Actually, I'm just going to close the presentation at this point. If you go back to the demo files, the second folder there, which this is the demo files. This is the project we just created, and the one I showed you was in C#, which is here. And then the one I actually showed you in Visual Studio, not the one in the presentation, but the one I showed you in Visual Studio, where I was just.
So where's the code in that? You showed us some folders.
The code's all in here. So if you go here, that's right. So one thing you got to understand about Visual Studio is it has this concept of solutions. So to open the code, you just open the solution. It opens in Visual Studio
with all the code in.
With all the code in it, right?
The code.
No, I'm a complete noob to Visual Studio.
That's okay. That's all right. I wasn't sure what you were asking.
Adrian, I guarantee that everybody who watches the video will thank you for making that very clear.
Sorry.
Except Eric probably understood. The thing is, Geoffrey, a lot of us haven't been there, and how they do things in that funny, strange world is a bit confusing for us. Unless you've actually been there, and most of us haven't, you need every single thing explained. And
that's why I explained from the beginning is we start up Visual Studio. That's why I kind of showed the whole part back in the beginning of my slides.
That wasn't meant as a criticism, Geoff. Yeah,
no, I get it. But what I'm trying to say is if you need to replicate this yourself, like if you didn't have the code here, and that's what I'm trying to say really quick, is if we go back to my slide one more time, let's see, I'll just switch it one more time here. Swap presentations. Back here one more time. Right here was where we start a new project, just create a new project. So just open Visual Studio. Maybe I wasn't clear on that. When you open Visual Studio, you get this.
You get the basic, but we don't get Geoff Griffith's code.
Yeah, you don't. You're right. You're right. But to
that's
replicate Geoff Griffith's code, you have to do all this right. Exactly. And that's why I included the project in there. So you're right about that.
But now I think we now understand having the project gives you the VB or C# source code.
Right, exactly. And
appreciate
if you want to see the actual code files themselves, they're just in this folder here.
Oh, they're visible individually as well.
Yeah, exactly.
You can edit them with a text editor, can't you, Geoff?
Absolutely. So you could just come in here and go to VB. Actually, that's the designer. Let's do something we're familiar with. Let's do the custom. You can just open it with, I don't know, Notepad or something.
Yeah, Notepad.
Oops. Of course, it opens
on the other monitor by any chance?
Yeah. So here you can see all the stuff.
Does the file, the download, also include a wrapper of .NET objects with a COM interface, or does it just show wrappers of COM objects with a .NET interface?
So what they've done is they've implemented the COM add-in methods in the designer file here. So essentially making this whole project a wrapper around those COM methods. So let's open that again. You can open in Visual Studio or Notepad. I'll just open it in Visual Studio real quick.
Yeah, but to the point, you're not wrapping .NET for COM. You're wrapping COM for .NET.
That's exactly correct. That is 100% correct. This is all in .NET, and that's again the reason why my add-in is only a single add-in. It's collection of files instead of having one for each, architecture like x86 and x64. This can all be in one architecture because it's built in .NET, which is platform independent. Isn't that beautiful?
Right, but that only tells half the story. That only tells half the story, because if we're developing an Access, right, we need to be able to wrap .NET objects. So because we're calling them from a COM app.
Well, actually, so the PIA, the primary interop assembly, already wraps all of the Access objects, and if you're calling that, if you want to call that from .NET, you can just use the interop assemblies for Office.
I don't want to call it from .NET. I want .NET from COM.
Right. So you want to do the backwards. So yeah, you have to load you have to load library on the .NET DLLs, and there's a specific loader for that. That's actually another conversation. That would be a great presentation as well, because Albert Kalal made an awesome tool, and the way it's a PDF combiner, but the way he did it, he kind of shows you how to basically be able to make one .NET DLL, and then you have two other DLLs, because COM has to be compiled for either x86 or x64, that basically loads his .NET DLL depending on the version, or I shouldn't say the version, the architecture is what I should say. But that's actually that's the reverse of what we're talking about here, and unfortunately that's probably a separate presentation.
Yeah. Well, okay, so
but I see what you're saying, Eric. For sure, that's a really good question.
Yeah. Only includes half of the story.
Right.
Your download file only includes calling COM from .NET, not.
That's right. Not the other way around. Not the other way around. But I can show you how to do that at another presentation.
I think we should also give everybody a chance to play with your files.
Absolutely.
For a while. And try to get some of because until you've done that, you're not even going to know the right questions to ask.
Right.
In a lot of cases. So we should do that. I'll be in touch with you and Crystal both about that. And Eric, if you'd like to contribute, that would be helpful too. And by then, Adrian will have figured it all out, and he'll be able to.
In a month, I may have made enough progress to be able to make the presentation myself.
Yeah. Well, we're going to have. Well, you guys are going to have presentations for the next year. So I'm going to turn the recording off in a minute here.
Okay. Thank you, George, and thank you, Crystal.
Yeah. Thank you, Geoffrey. I think you gave us enough to definitely whet our appetites and to challenge us.
And we still haven't gotten to the actual full add-in source files yet, so that could be another part 2 follow-up.
Yeah,
There actually is some
let's
tricks.
do that. Yeah, because we're
There's
almost,
some tricks.
Yeah, we're almost at 2 hours, but let's plan on doing that maybe March. And I'll turn off the recording now if you're unless, and I'll give you a chance to wrap it up, and then I'll turn the recording off.
Well, no, it's fine. I think we're good. I mean, we can stop at this point. I mean, unless there's any other questions. I don't know if really there's much more to say. I showed you the end set of files that we had. So
there was one more question, but it was unfortunately put as a reply to a previous one. It was
okay.
Ron McCary, can this be used to build COM objects? Moved along. That can be loaded by Access.
So,
Adrian, that's what I'm talking about.
That's right. Exactly.
I think possibly. I have one COM object I wrote to interface with the Autodesk Vault from Access, but it's using interop, which is kind of a pain in the butt. So I was wondering if this could be used for that purpose, but it looks like no.
Yeah.
Well, so you have you wrote a DLL. You have a DLL that's been made in COM already.
Correct. So basically, it's a wrapper for the Autodesk Vault thin client interface. So I can,
well, if it's in COM already, you can load it in .NET. You don't need to have anything else. .NET can read into those COM DLLs.
Well, I'm using it from Access.
Yeah, you're calling this DLL from Access, right?
Correct.
So you could just, if you needed to, you could compile. You can basically set a reference to that DLL in your .NET project, and also call it from your .NET code as well, because it's a COM DLL. If Access can call COM DLLs without any issue. And what Eric is saying is he wants to be able to call .NET DLLs from Access, from VBA, which can be done. It's really cool, actually. And there's a couple of different ways you can do that. You can compile .NET DLLs to COM, or you can compile them to .NET binaries and then have some load DLLs that are compiled for COM, and then use those DLLs to load your .NET DLL. So it's actually a set of 3 DLLs instead of just one.
I mean, that's basically what I did is I got a COM to interface with the Vault, which is obviously not a COM environment.
Okay. I don't know the Vault, but okay.
Well, it's a file management system for 3D modeling.
Okay. Cool.
Autodesk product. But it allows me to pull bill of materials from the Vault just by calling up the part number, not have to go through the import-export process and all this other kind of stuff. It's all done with interop. It makes it a little more difficult. It does work. It's just a little kludgy the way you have to do it.
So what would your scenario be in relation to the add-in or in relation to .NET?
I just wondering these libraries could generate that DLL using those tools instead of interop, but it doesn't look like it.
Well, so there's another thing that might be possible is to rewrite the functionality in .NET and then compile it as a COM DLL. That's also, I don't know if that, again, I don't really know what the Vault is. I don't know what your DLL does exactly, but that's like another option here too. If you couldn't remake this COM DLL, an old COM DLL that you had from a long time ago or something, but maybe you could remake it in .NET or use .NET libraries that would make it easier or something like that. You could take that .NET class, compile it to a DLL, and compile it to a COM DLL, which then could be called from Access.
So the Vault is a .NET API, so.
So there you go. Exactly.
So I'm using a COM wrapper to allow me to call it from Autodesk, from
I see.
AutoCAD, from Access, sorry.
I see.
So it allows me to pull data from it and write to it.
And if it's a .NET, .NET API, obviously you can call any .NET API from .NET. So
right.
You could just call it straight from one of these wrappers if you needed to, and then you could input into Access, or I don't know exactly what you want to do with the data. I mean, dump it into the database or something like that. I don't know.
Well, it's mostly pulling. It can pull the bill of material from the model itself. Of the Vault. So instead of having to, export the bill of material from The user doesn't have to export the bill of material and then go into Access and import it to get the bill into the Access.
Just
for
pulls it
ordering
right down.
purposes. It just calls up the vault and grabs it from the vault.
Yeah, that's nice.
Right.
Makes sense.
Okay, so
Thank you, Geoff.
thank you. Thank you, Geoff.
Thank you all.
Crystal.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Yes,
everybody
you
who
are
helped
so
contribute.
impressive.
So I'm looking forward to the follow-up. I'll see you all in January, I hope.
Mm-hmm.
And from there, we'll see what happens. Thanks again. I'm going to turn the recording off.